Grandpa says he has something to tell you.
During the funeral of my husband, who had taken his own life, my 4-year-old granddaughter pointed at his portrait and shouted those words. Startled, I grasped her hand and tried to take her to a waiting room. Immediately, my son-in-law stopped me.
The service is starting. We can talk later.
Knowing about my granddaughter's mysterious power, he looked pale. I bit my lip and stared at my husband's portrait. You have something to tell me, don't you? At that moment, I decided to uncover the truth, clenching my fist with resolve. I'm Helen, a 63-year-old housewife. I've been married to William, who is older than me and a company president, for 25 years. He's kind and considerate, and we've enjoyed peaceful days together. Thanks to him, I've been able to recover from days of sorrow. Interestingly, we both remarried. We both lost our previous spouses to illness and carried the weight of sadness while raising children alone. At that time, my daughter Amy was 10 years old, and Oscar, my husband's son, was 3 years old. My husband and I met through work, and our similar circumstances led us to naturally become close. Since Oscar was still very young, he didn't seem to understand that he had lost his biological mother or that he wasn't biologically related to me. After we got married, he quickly bonded with my daughter and they lived together as if they were real siblings. We were a happy and joyful family, but everything changed when Oscar entered junior high school. Up until then, Oscar had grown up believing that I was his biological mother. However, he learned the truth from a tactless relative.
So you were pretending to be my mother, even though you're just a stranger?
I didn't mean for it to be like that. I was going to tell you when you got older, and I've always cared deeply about you.
They're just words. You're just a liar.
After that, Oscar continued to rebel against me and went through a rough period. However, he finally settled down around the time he graduated from university and joined my husband's company. It seemed that being told by my husband that he would groom him as his successor gave him encouragement.
Mom, I was wrong. I'm going to turn over a new leaf and do my best from now on.
I still remember feeling relieved as I watched my son say this with shining eyes. Meanwhile, Amy, who had started working at my husband's company earlier, married her colleague John. He is a smart and capable person who excels at his job. Both my husband and I felt reassured knowing our daughter was in good hands with John. Shortly after, Amy became pregnant, and we eagerly awaited the birth of our grandchild. However, an unexpected tragedy struck our family. Amy passed away due to complications from a difficult childbirth, succumbing to severe bleeding. Her last words, almost like a whisper, were, "Please take care of the baby." Oh no. Amy. I couldn't accept the fact my daughter passed away and was frozen in disbelief. During that difficult time, my son Oscar gently comforted me.
Mom, stay strong. I'm here for you.
I wanted to be by the side of the child my daughter had brought into the world, but my son-in-law insisted on raising the child by himself. Raising a child on your own is tough. Besides, you have a job. Can't we at least help out while the baby is still little?
Thank you. But Amy took my hand and asked me to take care of the baby. I'll do my best.
But I suggested it with good intentions, but John firmly refused my help. Unable to insist against his decision, I chose to silently watch over them. My granddaughter was named Olivia and she grew up lively and healthy, despite my worries, reaching the age of 4. She was an adorable child who resembled Amy. Around that time, John started occasionally leaving Olivia with us. He didn't stay with us often, citing his busy schedule, but we were always happy to see our granddaughter whenever we could. Sometimes when John came to pick Olivia up, I could smell alcohol on him, but I assumed he had social obligations. My husband and I were too focused on our granddaughter to worry much about it. Olivia is growing up so pure and sweet.
It's like young Amy has come back to us. She's adorable.
My husband adored our granddaughter so much that he cherished every moment with her, playing hide and seek and tag. The sorrow of losing Amy never faded, no matter how much time passed, but spending time with Olivia helped heal that pain. However, something happened that would plunge me back into the depths of despair. That morning, while getting ready for work, my husband made an unusual request for dinner.
I'd love some fried chicken tonight. You make it so delicious.
Oh, thank you. With such praise, I'll have to put extra effort into it. Look forward to it.
Great, I'm counting on you. Well, I'm off.
Take care. Have a good day. Little did I realize that such a trivial conversation would be our last. Later in the afternoon, as I was preparing to go grocery shopping for dinner, my son-in-law called.
Please stay calm and listen.
What? What's wrong?
Your husband has passed away.
What? My husband suddenly passed away. He fell from the rooftop of a newly completed 5-story apartment building constructed by his company. My son-in-law John was the first to discover him. Apparently, just before the incident, my husband had sent a text to John.
He texted me saying, "There's something I'm concerned about in the new apartment. Can you come and check?" So I went, and that's when I found your husband lying there, bleeding from his head.
Oh no.
I called an ambulance, but it was too late.
I rushed to the hospital by taxi, but instead of being guided to a hospital room, I was directed to the morgue. I desperately called out to my husband, who was cold and covered in a white sheet. "Please. Open your eyes." Feeling lost and in tears, Oscar, who arrived later, held me tightly in his arms.
Dad, if you had any worries, you should have talked to us. It's not good to keep things to yourself.
What? According to the police investigation, his shoes were found neatly arranged on the rooftop, and statements from those involved revealed that my husband had been troubled. It was concluded that he had taken his own life. However, there were no signs of such behavior from my husband, and I can't imagine him leaving me and taking his own life like that. I thought we trusted each other and shared everything. Was that just my belief? Left on the brink of despair, with no energy to even prepare for the funeral, I was grateful that Oscar and John stepped in and took care of everything. And then, on the day of the funeral, since there was some time before the service began, Oscar was greeting business associates near the entrance. I was sitting with John and our granddaughter in the family section, but Olivia, who had been glancing at her grandfather's photo, suddenly stood up and exclaimed,
Grandpa says he has something to tell Grandma.
At that moment, I was taken aback. In fact, my granddaughter had a mysterious ability. I first noticed it when she was 2 years old. When we took her to visit Amy's grave, she exclaimed, "Mommy," and started chatting as if she could see her mother right there. Moreover, the details my granddaughter mentioned were things she couldn't possibly have known, so both my husband and son-in-law got shocked. When she was 3 years old, something similar happened.
The old lady next door is saying to help the dog.
Olivia suddenly said this. The elderly woman she mentioned had passed away a week earlier. So I found it strange, but I decided to check her house, and found a dog chained up and had been barely moving inside its doghouse. It seemed that my granddaughter had the ability to communicate with the deceased. However, John denied it.
It's just a series of coincidences. Olivia simply enjoys her imagination. Please don't mention this to anyone else.
Of course, I had no intention of sharing this with anyone, but I strongly believed in Olivia's abilities. I'm sure Olivia can see my husband. I thought to myself, unable to sit still. I took her hand to take her to a quiet room where we could talk more. However, my son-in-law stopped me firmly.
It's before the funeral. We can talk later.
He usually was gentle, but now he had a stern expression and looked pale. John tried to take Olivia to his side, but she resisted and didn't leave my side. Holding Olivia's hand, I gazed at my husband's photo and spoke to him in my mind. You have something to tell me, don't you? That's right. He couldn't have taken his own life. My husband left for work with his usual gentle smile, even making a dinner request. There was no suicide note and it didn't make any sense he's gone like that. As I pondered these thoughts, Oscar, who had been greeting attendees, approached the family seats. However, my attention was fixed on John, who seemed tense at that moment. Just then, Oscar called out to John, and the two went outside to smoke. Seeing an opportunity, I took Olivia to the waiting room and finally had a chance to hear her out. The words that came from my granddaughter's mouth were not something a 4-year-old would say, and it was clear that my husband was communicating to me through her. Moreover, it was unbelievably horrifying. I can't believe he's... I was shocked to my core, but Olivia continued with even more astonishing words.
Grandma, you're being targeted too. Grandpa says you need to run away quickly.
Upon hearing this, a chilling tremor ran through my entire body, prompting me to quickly seek refuge with the police. However, upon further reflection, I realized there was no evidence to support Olivia's story. I believe in my granddaughter's mysterious abilities, but I don't think the police would take it seriously. Besides, it would be troublesome if negative rumors about Olivia spread. However, I cannot let the person who harmed my husband get away with it. I will never forgive them. With determination, I returned to the venue. After that, many people who had connections with my husband gathered at the funeral to pay their respects. Then, during the time for the eulogy, Oscar stood before everyone, tears streaming down his face.
My father was a kind and reliable business leader. It's heartbreaking to see him gone like this. I wish I had noticed his struggles sooner. Dad, I'm sorry. I'll take care of the company from now on.
Oscar struggled to speak through sobs, and the sound of weeping from attendees began to fill the room. At that moment, I made up my mind and stood up, and asked the host for the microphone. Thank you all for taking the time to come here today for my husband. He's saying he has something to tell everyone, so I will speak on his behalf.
Hey, Mom. What's going on? Are you okay?
My son-in-law stared at Oscar with a fearful expression as he spoke to me in concern. As Olivia ran over to me and held my hand, the attendees began murmuring, "Speak on behalf of the deceased president? Is she delusional?" I raised my voice loudly to cut through the commotion in the room. My husband did not take his own life. He was pushed from the rooftop of the apartment building by someone, The shocking words that came out of my mouth instantly froze everyone in the room. "It was you," I shouted, pointing at the person. It was Oscar.
What are you talking about?
Amidst the chaos of the bewildered attendees, my son's calm expression suddenly turned into the face of a villain.
Are you trying to frame me?
Oscar continued to shout afterward, claiming that because I was his stepmother, my aim was to secure the inheritance for Olivia, who is my daughter's child. Upon hearing this, the attendees collectively looked at me with disapproval.
That's terrible. Just because there's no blood relation, accusing him like that.
Whispered voices murmured around me. Feeling that everyone in the room was on his side, Oscar smirked and continued to press me further.
The police concluded that Dad was tormented and took his own life. I'm innocent.
There was no evidence that my husband was tormented. You were the only one who testified that to the police.
Dad told me so. He said he couldn't bear to live anymore. He spoke his mind only to me. And his shoes were neatly lined up on the rooftop.
Oscar's face turned bright red, his eyes widened, and he raised his voice angrily, spitting as he spoke. I know the reason he took off his shoes on the rooftop. He told me about it.
What? What do you mean?
Then, I began to recount the circumstances my husband died, which I had heard from Olivia. It was my son who had invited my husband out to see the completed apartment that day.
Thanks to you, Dad, I've grown up. Let's wrestle like we used to.
When they got to the rooftop, he took off his shoes and encouraged my husband to do the same. At first, my husband was bewildered by the sudden invitation, but he fondly remembered playing like that with his son when he was a child and agreed to join Oscar. Later, after pushing my husband off the rooftop, Oscar arranged his shoes neatly to make it appear as though my husband had jumped on his own. After confirming that his father had stopped breathing, my son sent a text from my husband's phone to John saying, "Come to the new apartment right away." Upon hearing my account, Oscar turned pale, and his lips trembled.
Why would you know about that? Only Dad should have known.
My husband is here, and he's angry at you. You're coming after me next, aren't you? As Oscar realized I knew everything, sweat poured from his forehead.
Dad, are you really here? But I had no choice. Because it's his fault.
Resigned to his fate, my son began to confess everything that had happened. In truth, my husband had assessed that Oscar lacked the capability to run the business. He had informed both John and Oscar that he intended John to be his successor, with Oscar placed under him. However, unable to accept this decision, my son had plotted and carried out a plan to eliminate both my husband and me. Amy and I both thought of you as a true family, so this is really disappointing. I've recorded everything you just said, so I'm going to submit it to the police as evidence.
What? I'm not letting you do that.
Enraged, Oscar tried to strike me, but immediately after, it was my son who screamed in pain.
Ow! Let go of me.
It was John who had twisted his arm and stopped him.
He told me that he was entrusting me with the company and his son. I was planning to pass the presidency to Oscar once he grew into the role of CEO.
Despite saying that, my son-in-law seemed wary of Oscar. He sensed something amiss in Oscar's actions and behavior, suspecting that he might be up to something nefarious. Upon hearing Olivia's words at the funeral, John realized his suspicions might be true. John had tensed up at that time for that very reason.
Hand over the presidency. Don't lie. You're planning to take over both the company and the inheritance. Everyone wants money, right?
Someone among the attendees must have called the police, as they entered the venue at that moment. Suddenly, Oscar's eyes welled up with tears, and he clung to me.
Please, help me. We're family, right?
What? How can you even say that? Besides, I'm cutting all ties with you. Whatever happens to you is no longer my concern.
Hey! Don't be so cold. Please. Just don't let the police take me.
Make sure you pay for your crimes. As I spoke these words coldly, Oscar seemed to realize that nothing he said would change my mind. He collapsed to his knees. Afterwards, he was found guilty and sent behind bars. By taking my husband's life, he forfeited any rights to inherit the company or its assets. There was no one among the relatives to support him. Even if he were to return to the outside world, he would live a tough life. Meanwhile, I am now living with my granddaughter and son-in-law. Thanks to the adorable Olivia, who is growing up healthy, I am slowly regaining my spirits. Today, I placed freshly made fried chicken, which my husband loved, in front of his photograph, and talked to him. Thank you. I'm doing well.
I want to ask your father about a mugging incident. Mugging? My father? Yes. Your father is suspected of mugging. Is he at home now? Yes, he is here. Do you want to see him? The police officer looked puzzled for a moment at my tone, but said, "Please let me see him," so I took the police officer into the house and opened the door. My father is here. The police officer was stunned to see my father there. This was a few months ago. My name is James. I'm a fourth-year university student. I've decided to work for a major company, but there's still something I'm undecided about. Whether or not to take over my father's company. My father is the president of a small factory. When I was young, I wanted to take over the factory and become a president like my father, but that feeling disappeared when I entered my rebellious phase. I began to feel embarrassed by my father, who was always covered in oil stains in his work clothes. That feeling remained unchanged even after I became a teenager and even now, somewhere in my heart. After becoming an adult and working part-time jobs, I began to respect my father, who worked hard while supporting many employees and their families. But I couldn't shake the feeling that a salaryman who wears a suit and works hard is cooler than my father. One day, while shopping with my father, we were suddenly called out from behind. James. My father and I turned around together. There was a man of the same age as my father. Jack. Long time no see. This Jack person was apparently a classmate of my father's from high school. Jack, who was wearing a suit, happened to be on an outside sales trip. After revealing that he worked for a famous large company, Jack asked my father, "Did you take over the family business after all?" "Oh yeah, that's right. We're still managing somehow." "That dirty little factory of yours? You've become quite something as its president. And you're only a high school graduate? That's impossible. You really are pathetic." I was shocked by Jack's words. That factory was started by my grandfather and my father is the second generation. I knew he had taken over after graduating from high school, but I never thought there would be a classmate who would make fun of him like that. Jack continued to smile silently at my father. "So? Did you make your father's factory bigger? You said you were going to take over the company in high school and make it bigger." "No, unfortunately I didn't have any business sense. That dream didn't come true. Ha ha ha. You couldn't help it. You're good with your hands, but your head isn't very good. But it's good that you didn't go bankrupt. I thought guys like you were going bankrupt. Jack laughed heartily and slapped my father on the shoulder before saying, I have more work to do, so let's catch up at the next reunion, and leaving. My father, who had been talked down to, looked a little awkward and said, shall we go? Before walking off to resume shopping. At that time, I felt that my father's work was something that was being made fun of without any rebuttal from me. The balance between taking over my father's company or continuing to work for a famous large company tilted heavily towards working for the latter. A few weeks later, my father's alumni association was held. By chance, it was held at the bar where I worked part-time. The place was busy with many customers that day, and I didn't have many opportunities to bring food and drinks to the table where my father's alumni association was being held. I thought it was lucky, but I eventually had a chance to go to that table. I felt a little embarrassed about bringing drinks to my father's alumni association, but I kept quiet because it was my job. Our bar has private rooms. When I showed up at the table where my father's alumni association, which was being held in one of the large rooms rented out for the occasion, was taking place, my father, who happened to be near the entrance and exit, said with a smile, "Oh, James.
Are you his son?"
My father was asked by the woman next to him, then he introduced me as his son. I politely greeted them and arranged the drinks I put on the table. My eyes are just like my father's, and I'm just as serious as he is. My father's drunken classmates teased me, and I laughed awkwardly. Jack, who was sitting at a table a little away from us, noticed us and said, "We met recently too. James. Right? Are you planning to take over your father's small factory?" When I answered honestly, "No, I'm still thinking about it," to Jack's question with an alcoholic breath that made me feel disgusted, he shouted loudly, "Stop it. Your father's company is nothing special. James should work for a company like me instead of taking over such a company. Like me." He then began to brag about his career history, but something seemed off. He said he was in sales when we met before, but now he says he's become the head of accounting. I felt something was wrong but kept quiet because it could be troublesome if I pointed it out. However, my father's mouth became lighter because he was drunk. "Has your department changed since we last met?" "It hasn't been that long since we last met, a few weeks ago." "Was it an urgent transfer? Did sales not suit you?" Jack's mouth, which had been talking so much, stopped when he heard my father's words. Jack looked flustered and nodded his head saying, "Yes. That's right. Sales wasn't for me. As soon as I transferred, I became the head of accounting." "That's strange. Didn't that company get absorbed by a foreign company and have its accounting department based overseas?" As my father pointed out, the company Jack boasted about had been absorbed by a foreign company. Many people had noticed this but didn't point it out until my father did so. There was a burst of laughter at my father's remark. "Hey Jack. What's going on? Are you really the head of accounting even though you were absorbed by another company?" "Shut up. Can't you see I'm at this party?" Jack, who had been laughed at, trembled with regret and said, "I'll go home," before leaving with heavy footsteps. The people around him told my father that he hadn't done anything wrong, so Jack must have always been like that. Seeing my father being praised for what he said rather than being laughed at made me happy. Even though he was drunk, my father looked cool when he said what everyone else found hard to say. Half a year has passed since then. I still spend days wondering whether or not to take over my father's company. My confusion has only deepened day by day and honestly don't know what to do. One day while relaxing at home, the intercom rang. Since my mother wasn't there, I went to the entrance. Yes. Hello. You're James? The visitor said so in uniformed clothes. I replied with a stiff voice, yes. Surprised and wondering if I had done something wrong or not when the police officer said, regarding the purse snatching incident, there's something I want to ask your father. Purse snatching? My father? Yes. Your father is suspected of purse snatching. Is your father at home now? Yes, he's here, but do you want to see him? The police officer looked puzzled for a moment at my tone, but said, please let me see him, so I let the police officer into my house and opened the door to the room. My father is here. There was a Buddhist altar and a photograph of my father. I told the police officer that my father had passed away in a traffic accident, which made him freeze in shock. I'm sorry for your loss, said the police officer. I asked him, my father is not the kind of person who would snatch purses. Who suspects my father of being a purse snatcher? I can't tell you that because it's personal information. I'm sorry for bothering you today. After apologizing to me several times, the police officer left. I was confused about who had accused my father of purse snatching, but I soon found out. A few days later, I was working at my father's factory to fill the void left by his absence. My mother is now taking over for my father, but she is already in her 50s and can only help with his work a little bit. To fill my father's void, I was helping out at the factory when Jack came barging in. Take me to your father. Return what he stole. The factory was making quite a bit of noise from its large machines, but Jack shouted with a voice that could not be drowned out by such noise. I was surprised by Jack's voice, but I wasn't the only one. As other employees stopped working and were surprised, I spoke to Jack. My father isn't here. Then at home? Call him out right away. I'm having trouble because your father snatched something from me. I heard a voice from one of the employees saying, purse snatching? Is it our president? But Jack crossed his arms and refused to budge. He kept shouting, give me your father. In response, I asked him, my father is not the kind of person who would snatch purses. Are you sure you're not mistaken? No, it was definitely your father. He must have been jealous of me working for a big company and snatched my bag. Fortunately, I didn't have my wallet or anything with me at that time, but it's unforgivable that he snatched something in the first place. The police are useless, so I came here myself to talk to him. When did this happen exactly? That was, about 2 weeks ago. When Jack answered decisively after hesitating for a moment, the employees began to stir. I guess they were confused by the commotion. When I asked Jack again if it was really 2 weeks ago, he got angry with me for being persistent. He started shouting loudly. What's going on? You keep asking me over and over again. I said it was 2 weeks ago. An elite like me came all the way to this small and smelly factory just for this. Hurry up and let me talk to your father. I felt my chest getting hot as Jack made a fuss. It wasn't just that he made disparaging remarks about my father's workplace or his colleagues' work. What bothered me most was that he was trying to pin the blame for purse snatching on my father. My father passed away in a traffic accident 1 month ago and cannot be here. When I told him clearly, Jack looked like he had swallowed a pigeonhole and said, huh? I continued. How could my father snatch purses when he passed away 1 month ago? Maybe there wasn't even any purse snatching at all. I knew that Jack was lying because I found out at our recent class reunion that he had always been a liar since his school days. Furthermore, it turned out that Jack had been jealous of my father since their school days because the girl he liked had liked my father instead. He had always harbored unnecessary rivalry against my father because of such petty jealousy. I couldn't forgive Jack for trying to pin an unfounded accusation on my deceased father just because of such petty jealousy. So then he snatched purses just before he died? As Jack continued to insist on his claim, someone else started shouting from another direction. Our president wouldn't do something like that. Our president is someone who dresses seriously and walks around like an honest person. Sure. The reason why we are always short-handed is that the president teaches technology and encourages independence. He was a good person who always thought about the staff and business partners without thinking about profits. As Jack trembled, voices praising his father rose one after another. I was honestly moved. I felt ashamed of myself for thinking that my father's work was embarrassing. My father was a president who was respected by his staff and loved enough to be protected even in such a situation. Jack's eyes were filled with tears as he heard the voices of the factory workers defending my father. I delivered the final blow. The fact that you tried to frame my father for a lie. I will definitely consult with the police. With that, Jack raised his voice and fled from the factory. Afterwards, I went to the police as promised to report that my father had been falsely accused by Jack. The evidence was a recording of Jack's statement made by one of the staff members who had been thoughtful enough to record the argument at that time. Thanks to this, there was evidence left. The police acted quickly because there was evidence, and Jack was caught in no time. Jack's lie about accusing someone of a crime became his own crime, and he ended up in jail for a while. He had insulted my father while he was alive and tried to frame him even after he died. I felt relieved that he got what he deserved. A few days later, someone claiming to be Jack's wife came to our house with a gift box to apologize to me and my mother. When I asked if it was because of what happened at the reunion that Jack had framed my father, Jack's wife sighed and told me,
Yes, that's right. It seems that he was hurt at the reunion.
Actually, Jack was an elite who had been fired from his company. He had been looking for a job but it didn't go well, and that's when he met me and my father. Jack, who was obsessed with being an elite, lied, but when he got drunk, he told inconsistent lies and ended up embarrassing himself. He began to resent my father and decided to frame him. I was disgusted by his ridiculous reason for lying, but it seemed that Jack's wife felt the same way. She told me that she intended to divorce him. Jack apparently had no children, so even if he got out of jail, no one would be waiting for him. After graduating from college, I decided to take over my father's company. One reason was that I was worried about the management of the company since my father had just passed away. Another reason was that I couldn't forget the voices of the staff members who had protected my father when Jack lied about him. I wanted to become a president who is loved and respected by staff members like them. That incident became a turning point for me. Since I belonged to the Faculty of Business Administration, I could manage the part of management that my father wasn't good at, but I had to learn from staff members about technology. The staff members taught me many things saying, if it's for his son, and they also told me many stories about my father. Every time they did so, I realized how great my father was. Dad, you were really cool. I'm ashamed that I didn't realize it while you were alive. I'm really sorry. I spoke to his portrait. After work, I'm covered in oil stains. It's embarrassing now that I used to think this is uncool. This dirt is proof of how hard my father worked. I'll do my best to become a president like you. And I'll definitely make your dream come true. I spoke to his portrait again and felt like my father smiled. I'm going to work hard from now on to become a president like him. I want to fulfill my father's dream of expanding the town factory that has been passed down since my grandfather's generation.